Hello, and welcome to American Heron Wargaming. This is a battle report for Modulorka, an Orky skirmish game published by Mr. Modulorka. To start things off, my opponent and I drew cards for our battlefield, missions, and a battlefield condition. Since we're playing over our lunch break, we've been limiting ourselves to 30-point games, and thus we only pick from the battlefield cards that feature 30-point forces. For this game, we got the Donut, which is the same as our previous game. Which is still nice because I'd recently printed out some new terrain from Forbidden Prince Badlands line, which suits that layout perfectly. Unlike our last game, which was entirely focused on guest appearances, the theme of this mission was loot, loot, loot. Our primary mission was grab the loot, so there would be 10 victory points distributed across the battlefield to be picked up and collected by hand. The secondary mission was secret loot, where 3 victory markers would be distributed secretly by one player across 2 different objective markers. At the end of the game, the player controlling those markers would net those points. We drew from the battlefield condition deck and got the Eye of the Storm, which is a Battle Royale style modifier where the board shrinks at the end of each turn. We also drew an event card, but that one is secret and doesn't get revealed until the end of turn 2. As I mentioned in my last battle report, one of the house rules my opponent and I have agreed to is that we've removed all cards from the battlefield condition and event decks which don't do anything. We agree that it's more fun to introduce more chaos at all the time. Speaking of more chaos, we definitely didn't discuss at all what our plan was for warbands ahead of time. I brought my Golden Ord Flyboys, 1 Horde Boss with a Jetpack, Buzzsaw, and Bazooka Pistol, 2 lads with Jetpacks, Bludges, and Pistols, and then 1 lad legging it with a rifle and a grenade. I forgot to get a vanity photo of my opponent's force, but they also had a Horde Boss with a Jetpack, but with a grenade launcher as armament. Then they had 3 lads with Jetpacks, Bludges, and Pistols. I realize now that this map was actually larger than we were supposed to have, but with 7 out of 8 models on the board having jetpacks, I guess it kinda worked out in the end. We set up terrain in alternating turns, keeping at least 4 inches between pieces so that it didn't get too cluttered. Then we set up the victory points for the loot as described on the mission card, and my opponent placed the objective markers and secretly allocated the VPs to them. We did realize that the placement of one of the markers would leave it off the board at the end of the game due to the Eye of the Storm rule, so then we just moved it closer in. Then we set up our forces, with the overwhelming strategy for setup being, zog it, get behind cover to start, but the jetpacks are going to start flying right away anyways, so don't get too nuts over it. My opponent got the initiative for turn 1, and we were off. And off we were, as the enemy boss jetpacked right into my deployment zone, picked up a victory point, and then they tried to catch my boss and one of my lads with a grenade from the grenade launcher, but only the lad took the hit. Realizing that my now wounded lad was just a single attack away from getting downed, I activated him next, and jetted over to my opponent's side of the board. My lad tried to put a shot on a rival jetpacker, but missed. And then the exact same thing happened to my opponent's next lad. Successful jump, unsuccessful shot. I moved up the foot slogger, who picked up a victory point, and popped a rifle round into the enemy boss. However, my wounded lad was then knocked out in the backfield. My boss was up next, and charged into the enemy boss. He barely succeeded with his clawba attack, but it was a success. Since the enemy boss had already activated, he couldn't counterattack and was forced to take a pin. As the winner of that combat, my boss was then able to make a dodge move over to snag another victory point. Not wanting to leave anything to chance, my opponent's final activation was taking the downed jetpack lad out of the picture. For my last activation, I just moseyed my jetpacker up to the one who had tried and failed to shoot him and tried to whack with the bludger, but that failed. And that was a wrap on turn 1. The edge of the board shrunk by 2 inches, but nothing was particularly affected by that. To start off turn 2, I activated my rifleman, scooched him back to pick up a second victory point, and then popped another pair of damage into the boss with his rifle. Good going so far. Pinned and hurting, the enemy boss activated next, reloading his grenade launcher and immediately firing it again, taking 2 damage off the rifleman. On the other side of the wall, my other jetpacker landed a hit. And, in the first instance of our entire Modulorka career so far, my opponent pulled off a successful counterattack, sending 2 damage right back and leaving both orcs pinned in place. Since a counterattack isn't your own activation, my opponent was then able to follow up with their actual activation. One of the remaining backfielders jetted over to my side and knocked down my rifleman before he could do any more damage. However, I wasn't quite ready to lose another lad just yet, so I spent my boss's full turn moving and rallying him back up again. Hanging out in the back, my opponent's final jetpacker went on a little gathering spree, picking up 1 and then 2 victory points. And that was the end of turn 2. Which meant that it was time to reveal the event card. We got Battle Fatigue, so no more rally actions. Good thing I did that last turn. The edges of the board closed in another 2 inches, but there was still plenty of space to fight over. As my opponent began the third turn, I realized that putting two models in proximity when there is a grenade launcher on the other side of the board is not usually advisable. The enemy boss reloaded and fired again, but we lucked out as both of my lads were unharmed. I then activated the rifleman again, who moved up into cover and shot down the boss. However, my lad on the other side of the wall also got knocked down, so now I had no opportunity to rally him. I did send my boss over the wall and knock out the lad who done it though, just for honor's sake. Then my rifle lad got knocked down by a move and claw buff from another enemy. My opponent's third lad moved up and took another victory point and tried to shoot at my boss, but couldn't land the hit. Unfortunately for me though, I ran the math and realized that again I was in a nearly unwinnable situation. My boss was only carrying one victory point, and the two my rifleman had dropped could easily be recovered. Plus, my opponent's one lad had a basket of 3, and my only chance to knock those out of his hands was a roll of the 6 from the chainsword for the double power hit. Before I could make that attempt though, the board shrunk down another 2 inches. My boss leapt into the fray, but failed to even hit the lad carrying the victory points. The rifleman was coup de grace out of the game, and his 2 VP got recovered. Then, just to really seal the deal, the other jetpacker skipped away from my boss and picked up another victory point. So, at the end of turn 4, it was a 6-1 loss for me. In the end, I'm not exactly sure what else I could have done differently. Losing my one lad in the first turn was rough, but that kind of all came down to dice. If I'd started chipping away at the boss earlier, that might have helped, but with all those jetpacks on the field, it's not like positioning made that much of a difference. After the game, though, my opponent and I realized that we'd somehow, miraculously, made it through a game where there were 7 jetpacks on the board, but not a single one under or overshot its target. Props to the mechs for working all the kinks out. That's it for now, and don't forget, we's the best.